Now, this is the most detailed chart, and I wanted to share this with you because I know that several of you sell into these industries, and I thought it would be useful for you to have this information. This is the enterprise spending. This is what businesses buy from solution providers. And you can see, going down the left-hand side, there's that $2.5 trillion that I had up in the previous slide. And here, in descending order by amount of IT purchases, are the industries: manufacturing and natural resources, government, communications, media services, banking and insurance. If you were to combine banking and insurance into financial services, they would be by far the largest. But we split those two out here. Retail, utilities, transportation, and so on. And so, as you can see, we had that worst year on record in 2009, but we've bounced back fairly nicely. A 3.7% increase, and there are different numbers by industry. Looking ahead, actually the next 2 to 3 years are even stronger. So we're heading into some good times ahead. The last figure out on the right-hand column is the current average growth rate. So over the 4-year period, or 5-year period rather, what the average growth rate on each of these industries is. The other thing I did was to kind of just note in green there, highlighted, where some of the real big numbers are, well, over 5%. And utilities, there's a lot of work in utilities. They're going to smart metering and other things. So that's a very healthy sector to be marketing into. So those are the details on the industry spending. So where does all this growth come from? What are we going to be spending our money on? Let's take a look at this social media and transparency, some of these trends that will offer us some opportunities. This is a survey that Gartner did looking at the use of social media by industry. And we asked companies, there was a large sample size, about 1,600 companies participated, and we actually got a breakdown of how many of those companies are actively using social media in their business activities. And you can see that across all these businesses, the average is about 56% of the businesses are using social media. And it varies. Now, obviously, in media itself, it's very high, 85%. Some businesses are less, utilities. But even government is at about 50%. So the reason this is so important is that when you look at the demographic, this Generation Y, which are people who were born between 1980 and the year 2000, that group, which actually represents about 78 million people in the United States. This is the new channel for where they're making their informed purchasing decisions. That's why these companies are beginning to get involved with social media. We look at what types of social media are being used. From the same survey, those companies who said that they were using social media, so the sample size dropped to a little bit more than half. Here's what they were using. Facebook, by far, was the largest. It had 74% of the companies who use social media use Facebook. Twitter and YouTube, there were others also mentioned, LinkedIn and MySpace and others. But these were the top 3. Some of the interesting things here was that in energy and utilities, we talked about earlier, they're using Twitter between their field service organizations and customer service. So they kind of communicate back and forth with Twitter. So this is kind of sort of talks about the trend moving away from traditional media, printed media and television, and more toward social media because of the advantages of context-specific messaging and interactions. We're going to talk a little bit about that in emerging technologies. But these offer tremendous advantages to companies wanting to engage with their customer base. Now this is a slide. This is a social media site. I wanted to just kind of talk about some of the power behind these sites. This one was developed by some students from the from MIT. It's actually currently under development. The name of the site is freerisk.org. Has anyone heard of this site? Anyone visited the site? Okay. It's very new. And what they're doing, it's sort of like a Wikipedia site, kind of an open source, where they actually assess the credit worthiness of publicly traded companies using available data. And they're tapping into some of these new sources of interactive data, like the Securities and Exchange Commission's XBRL, or this next generation Edgar system that is just being launched now. Using information like this site is developing new models, ways of assessing the credit worthiness of publicly traded companies. The reason they started the site was going back to the financial crisis of 2008. You know, they felt that Moody's and S&P really kind of fell down when they rated companies like AIG and Lehman and Bear Stearns. So they started this process up. And they open up their models to anyone. You can contribute ideas, you can critique the models. They will also take suggestions on how to improve them. And using these sort of evolving models for creditworthiness, they actually assess all these publicly traded companies. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but actually the developers, I spoke to them on the phone, they sent me this slide. Each of these little dots on here is actually a ticker symbol. This is a grid that they've developed, where in the upper right is high-risk companies, and in the lower left, it's more less risky companies. And so what they're able to do is kind of position companies based on their modeling along this continuum. Now, what I find really interesting about this whole approach here is that think of what an impact this would have if you were a CFO of a company. You know, what impact this might have on your cost of capital, for example. You know, this is really challenging, well-established, concepts like like Moody's and Fitch and so on, about AA, AAA bond ratings and so on, by coming up with a new, more open, more real-time approach to credit worthiness. So I think it's something that we all need to pay attention to. These kinds of sites are being developed as we speak, enabled by new sources of information, like the SEC's new Edgar system. So really powerful.